Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive? This time, we're tackling something I bet you've thought about before, probably while holding a menu. Tipping.
Oh, yeah, tipping. Everyone's got an opinion on it.
Exactly. But today, we're going beyond just how much should I tip. We're going deeper. Specifically, we're looking into that claim that tipping in the U.S. is rooted in slavery,
Right, a bold claim. Lots of folks saying it's straight up fact.
which is why we're diving into the research. We want to see what evidence is out there, and you can be the judge.
Yeah.
So to kick things off, one of the big arguments you came across was this connection to the 1619 Project, right?
Yeah, definitely a common thread. Activists like Saru Jayaman, who wrote the book Forked, they argue that tipping was a way to underpay black workers after the Civil War.
Right, that it was basically a loophole to avoid paying fair wages.
Yeah.
It's an idea that's gaining traction. We even saw some fact checks labeling this connection as true.
And that's where things get interesting. See, while Forked is often cited as proof, when we dug into it, it only dedicates a handful of pages to this connection and relies on a very few primary sources. So it's a classic case of needing to dig a little deeper, look beyond the headlines.
Don't believe everything you read, right? Okay, so if not post-Civil War America, then where did tipping come from? What did our research turn up?
Get this. We found evidence of tipping in England going all the way back to the 1600s.
Whoa, really? Like how far back are we talking?
I'm talking diary entries from Samuel Pepys, that's 1660s. Then you've got newspaper mentions, and even Charles Dickens wrote about gratuities. So it seems like tipping was already happening across the pond long before America even existed.
Okay, so are we saying that Americans basically imported tipping? That's wild. But wouldn't that mean those early Americans were all about it?
Funny enough, not quite. Our research suggests that early Americans actually saw tipping as this stuffy, aristocratic European custom, something they wanted to distance themselves from.
Wait, so they were like the original anti-tippers.
It seems that way, which makes you wonder, how did we go from rejecting it to it being so deeply ingrained in our culture?
Yeah, that's quite a turnaround. So how did tipping become such an American thing?
Well, our research did show that, like a lot of things in America, tipping was impacted by the racism and discrimination of the Jim Crow era. But, and this is a big but, some southern states during that time actually passed laws against tipping.
Hold on, I need to process this. So during Jim Crow, when racial tensions were high, some southern states decided to outlaw tipping. That doesn't really track with the whole tipping started as a way to exploit black workers narrative.
Exactly. It's a detail that often gets overlooked. States like Mississippi, Tennessee, South Carolina, they all had these anti-tipping laws on the books.
Wow. Okay, so we've got tipping in England way
Yeah.
back, early Americans turning their noses at it, and then southern states trying to ban it during Jim Crow. It's like a historical puzzle.
And like any good puzzle, it's more nuanced than it first appears. Now, this deep dive isn't saying that race played no role in how tipping evolved in the U.S., but it does suggest that attributing its origins solely to slavery is a bit of an oversimplification.
It's a good reminder that things are rarely black and white, right? Especially when we're digging into the past. Okay, so let's set aside the origins debate for a minute.
Mhm.
What about today? Why do people tip now in the 21st century? What did our research say about that?
Well, it seems like a lot of it comes down to psychology. There's this whole mix of motivations at play. For one, we're social creatures, right? We care about social approval. We don't want to be seen as cheap or stingy.
So we're all just walking around worried about someone judging our tipping etiquette. Is that what you're saying?
Well, there's definitely that aspect of it, but it's more than just not wanting to be seen as a bad tipper, right? I mean, think about it. Tipping is weird. You're giving someone extra money on top of what you're already paying for a service they've already provided.
It's true. When you lay it out like that, it does seem kind of strange. So why do we do it? Is it all about social pressure?
Partially, yeah. But one of the studies we looked at found that big groups actually tip a smaller percentage than smaller groups.
Wait, really? What's up with that?
Researchers call it the diffusion of responsibility. Basically, when there are more people sharing the bill, each person feels less individually accountable for leaving a good tip.
Ah, so it's like group projects back in school.
Right.
The bigger the group, the easier it is to slack off because the blame gets spread around.
Exactly. But here's the thing, there's more to it than just social pressure. Our research uncovered this whole other layer of tipping the emotional side of it.
Oh, interesting. Tell me more about that. What did they find?
Well, it turns out we have this deep-seated desire to reward good service, or at least what we perceive to be good service. It's like this innate sense of fairness. We want to be seen as good and fair people, and that includes tipping well.
Right, so it's not just about the money. It's about how we feel about ourselves, about being a good person.
Mhm.
I can see that.
Exactly. And it ties into other emotions too. Gratitude, avoiding guilt. There's a reason it feels good to leave a good tip and kind of crummy to leave a bad one, even if we try to justify it in our heads.
It's like that internal battle, right?
Hmm.
On one hand, you're thinking, okay, the service wasn't amazing, but then there's that other voice saying, but they're working hard. Maybe they're having a bad day. Don't be cheap.
Exactly. But here's where things get even more interesting. While we tell ourselves we're tipping based on the quality of service, some research suggests that connection might be weaker than we think.
You're saying that even if the service isn't top-notch, we're still likely to tip anyway.
Mhm.
Why is that? I mean, if we're being honest, we've all had those dining experiences where we still left a decent tip. It's like it's ingrained in us.
It's true. And it's something researchers have been trying to wrap their heads around, too. They call it the tipping service puzzle. Because if tips don't always reflect the actual quality of service, why do servers bother going the extra mile? Why not just do the bare minimum?
It's a good question, especially when you consider those studies that found servers who introduce themselves by name or like squat down at the table to get bigger tips. It's not about the food being cooked well. It's these little social cues that somehow trigger generosity. It's kind of bizarre when you think about it.
It is. And it all points to this idea that tipping might be driven more by our perceptions as customers and those unspoken social expectations than a direct reflection of how good the service actually was.
Okay, I'm definitely starting to rethink my whole approach to tipping after this deep dive. But let's say we want to move away from this flawed system. Is that even possible? What does the research say about alternatives to tipping?
That's the million-dollar question, right? And the research suggests there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution. It seems like the ideal approach might actually depend on the type of restaurant and the overall dining experience they're going for.
So what, different strokes for different folks?
Exactly. Like we see a lot of fine dining places moving towards a service charge model. So a fixed percentage is added to the bill, similar to how some places add a gratuity for large parties.
That makes sense. You're already paying a premium for that kind of experience, so having the true cost reflected up front probably feels less jarring to customers who are used to those higher price points.
Right. But then you have more casual restaurants. It's harder to imagine those beloved local spots suddenly becoming no tipping zones.
Yeah, I can see that. People are creatures of habit, and some traditions die hard.
Hmm.
So what's the solution for those kinds of places?
Well, the research seems to agree that customer education is key.
So more informed diners equal a better system.
Exactly. We need to be more aware of how our tipping decisions impact the entire system. It's not just a personal choice you're making between you and your server. It's part of this larger conversation about fair wages, power dynamics, and societal expectations.
Wow, this deep dive has been a real eye-opener. I came in thinking it was just about whether tipping was tied to slavery, but it's so much more complex than that. It's about history, psychology, economics, even a bit of sociology thrown in there.
And that's the beauty of it, right? Even something as seemingly simple as tipping can unlock all these different layers of understanding about ourselves and the world around us.
Well said. This definitely gives us all a lot to think about. But before we wrap things up, any final food for thought for our listeners out there as they navigate the wild world of tipping?
Well, if tipping with all its flaws is so deeply ingrained in our culture, is it possible it serves a purpose we haven't fully acknowledged? Could it, in its own messy way, actually contribute to the social fabric of dining, fostering a sense of connection and reciprocity between servers and customers? That's something I'll be pondering until our next deep dive.
Ooh, I like that. A little something to chew on. And on that note, we'll leave you to ponder that very question. Until next time, happy tipping, everyone.